When a devout Mormon author and Doomsday preacher met with his biggest fangirl, nobody could have assumed the impact that they would make on the Latter-day Saint scene. Even more than that, nobody could have assumed how evil they truly were, or the horrific path they would soon take. Here we have a case that really covers a lot of bases. It's a story related to cults, conspiracies, media frenzy, national outrage, and even lost media. This is the story of one of the biggest crimes in recent memory, the Tammy Daybell Doomsday murders. And without further ado, let's start back at the very beginning. Back on August 11th in 1968, a boy named Chad Guy Daybell was born. Growing up in a strict Mormon household in Springville, Utah, he had an upbringing that was pretty par for the course in that environment. When he grew up, he entered into Brigham Young University, and 1 year later he became a missionary. As a missionary, he spent 2 years working in New Jersey, a place that apparently needs some Jesus. Once he was finished, he went back to school and graduated with a degree in journalism. Now a full-fledged college graduate, Chad went on to start his adult life. He met and married a woman named Tammy Douglas when he was 22 years old. The two would come to have 5 children together over the years. Chad started out working as a copy editor for the Standard Examiner in Ogden. Over time, though, it seems he developed quite a fascination with the dead. Chad wasn't making a lot of money, so he would take work from time to time as a grave digger to supplement the household. This led to him eventually working as a cemetery sexton, basically a cemetery caretaker for the city of Springville. Chad's true passion and ideal career path, though, was writing. Working with a publisher in Springville called Cedar Fort Incorporated, he developed his first novel, An Errand for Emma, a novel for Mormons by Mormons. Getting more into the writing, he left his job in the cemetery system to focus more on making his novels work. After 2 years of writing, he published his second book, 1 Foot in the Grave, a book about his experiences taking care of cemeteries. In 2004, Chad decided to start his own publishing company entirely, one called Spring Creek Book Company. There he began to both self-publish his own works as well as the works of other authors. Most of these stories related to Mormon beliefs, aimed at a Mormon audience for sure, and revolved around the idea of the end of the world. However, he wasn't making a whole lot of money with this venture. The whole company was only pulling in about $2,000 a month. While that went a lot further back in 2004, it wasn't enough to support a wife and 5 kids by any means. Chad went back to working at the cemetery, but he still kept writing. Over time, he cultivated quite the audience around his books. Chad claimed that he had had 2 near-death experiences that let him perceive life from, in his own words, beyond the veil. Mainly writing about the apocalypse and dystopian futures, he said, "I don't fictionalize any of the events portrayed. I'm really not that creative. My torn veil allows information to be downloaded into my brain from the other side. The scenes I am shown are real events that will happen." Chad's prominence as an author got him a lot of authority within certain Mormon circles. He began to regularly contribute to a paid forum called Another Voice of Warning, which was mainly what it sounds like, a series of warnings about the upcoming end of days. On these platforms, Chad would speak of his own near-death experiences and visions of the future. While thinking about the end of the world isn't really that unusual, being very common in fiction, Chad's views were different in the fact that they were very real to him. Over time, those views only grew in intensity. In around 2006, a change in Chad's character became evident to those around him. He had grown quite obsessed with preparing for the apocalypse. A couple of years later, he was claiming that he was having direct visions of how the world would end. Then he began to prophesize about exact details of what would happen: earthquakes, war, mass destruction, and the like. Chad began working with a few other apocalyptic authors, becoming the publisher of a woman named Julie Rowe. Not only did Julie write stories that lined up with Chad's beliefs, she also claimed to be a clairvoyant as well. The two bonded over their similar prophecies and spiritual gifts. Both of them grew pretty popular among the Mormon Doomsday prepper scene. He started working with another author named Suzanne Freeman as well, but Suzanne wasn't so keen on Chad's increasingly radical beliefs. Over the relatively short time that she knew him, she could already see that his views were starting to differ more and more from the standard Mormon beliefs, becoming much more of his own thing. Feeling that freestyling with the religion was both off-putting and dangerous, she stopped working with him. In 2005, Chad began to speak a little more about the voices he heard in his head. After seeing a series of visions that showed him that Utah was about to be wiped out by a massive earthquake, he decided it was time to pack up and move. He said that one voice in his head in particular was telling him specifically to move to a town in Idaho called Rexburg. So that very June, Chad, Tammy, and a few of their kids packed up and moved out to Idaho. While the prophesized earthquake never actually happened, Chad seemingly never lost faith in his visions, and the family decided to stay there regardless. This brings us to the story of a woman named Lori Vallow. Born as Lori Cox in 1973, she also grew up as part of a Mormon family. Similarly to Chad, she got married pretty young, marrying her high school boyfriend at the age of 19. The two divorced shortly after, but it wouldn't really break Lori's stride. It would merely be the first marriage of many. She married again 3 years later, this time having a son named Colby. However, she would divorce again only 3 years after that. Making a living as a hairdresser, she was doing fairly well for herself. Lori even appeared as a contestant in the Miss Texas Beauty pageant in 2004. It was time for Lori to marry one more time, this time to a man named Joseph Anthony Ryan Jr. Joseph even adopted Colby, her previous son. Then the two had a daughter together named Tylee Ryan. But still, not all was well. Colby said that Joseph had been touching him inappropriately. This led to a bitter divorce and a long, drawn-out custody battle. Eventually, Joseph lost custody entirely. Lori had a very overprotective brother named Alex Cox. Alex wasn't above engaging in violence for the sake of his sister. In fact, he was more than happy to do so. He attacked Joseph in 2007 after hearing that he had been abusive to Lori and the kids. For that, he was sentenced to serve a 90-day sentence in jail. Lori was ready to get back into the game, getting married once again in 2006 to a man named Leland Charles Anthony Vallow, who went by Charles. Now living in Arizona together, in 2013 the two decided to adopt Charles' grandnephew, a boy named Joshua Vallow, who they called JJ. Because of his parents' drug habits, JJ had both been born with drugs in his system and had parents who were unable to take care of him. Having been diagnosed with autism, JJ required more care than their other kids, but they were up for it. Having been taken care of by his grandparents, Kay and Larry Woodcock, up until this point, it seemed like he would now have a very average upbringing in a more traditional nuclear family environment. For a while, the family moved out to the island of Kauai in Hawaii to work in a small business there. Due to this, JJ's grandparents weren't able to see him for quite a while, but they remained in contact. After a while, though, the family did move back to Arizona. Throughout all of this time, Lori was still a very devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, raising all of her kids as Mormons within the church. Little did anyone know that Lori was already starting to lose her mind, though. She was having dark thoughts, and these dark thoughts would only come to be exasperated when she came to find fascination with a series of books, the Standing in Holy Places series written by Chad Daybell. In 2018, Joseph Anthony Ryan, Lori's ex-husband who she had the bitter custody battle with, died in his apartment from what appeared to be natural causes, cardiovascular disease. Given that Lori had spoken to her friends multiple times about wanting to kill him in the past, it seems that Lori took this as some sort of a sign that she was right. She said, "He told everybody that I was this lying, crazy Mormon and got up in court and said all of these horrible things about me. I was going to kill him, like the scripture says. Like Nephi killed, just to stop the pain and stop him coming after me and to stop him coming after my children." Nephi is a prophet in the Mormon scriptures who killed an evil man named Laban. Lori, slowly coming to fancy herself as somewhat of a prophet, likely felt some sort of connection as she too wanted to kill the person who she felt was the most evil in her own life. Although this time it wasn't some sort of prophesized military leader type of enemy, it was her ex-husband. While Joseph was confirmed to have died from natural causes, this only seemed to embolden Lori in her dark desires. By now, Chad was a member of a Mormon podcast and forum called Preparing a People. Here he would speak about his beliefs, his visions of the future, and his books. However, he did so in a much more subdued way than he would have liked, having to hide his more radical beliefs from the rest of the church.
As you know, I've I've had a couple near-death experiences, and I'll talk about that. And it seems like I've been waiting for 20 years for something to happen. I write all these novels, and people are like, when's it going to start, you know? This is the Houston Temple. I've looked at other photos, and that, you know, that's probably 20 feet deep from the front fountain, and just how that temple was filled with water. North Korea, they're going a little nuts right now. Kim Jong-un, even as we speak, Hurricane Irma is on its way to Florida. The fires in California and Montana, it just feels like times are starting to begin.
In turn, getting more and more into Chad's apocalyptic series of books, Lori became more interested in these sorts of radical beliefs herself. Branching out to other creators within the same sphere, Lori started listening to other Mormon and excommunicated Mormon radicals talk about their beliefs and near-death experiences on podcasts as well. Lori, her old friend Melanie Gibb, and a woman that she had just recently became friends with named Zulema Pastenes decided that they would attend a Preparing the People event in St. George, Utah.
I'm just very honored to be part of the conference. I've recently released my autobiography entitled Living on the Edge of Heaven, where I tell more about my 2 near-death experiences and how that prompted me to write my novels. And I will also at the conference talk a little bit more about my upcoming novel, where I talk more about some of the refugees that I've seen coming from the West Coast after there's destruction and troubles there, and how we will be able to assist them and help them not only physically but also spiritually, and help them in their lives, and I'm eager to share that with you.
Lori had made it known that she wanted to meet Chad, one of her favorite authors, but her friends didn't realize how truly zealous she was about the meeting. Lori met Chad after he made a presentation, talking in a manner that was noted as being very flirtatious to those who saw them. Given that Chad had suddenly been approached by a clearly interested beauty pageant contestant, he was more than ready to see where this might go. Afterwards, the two exchanged contact information. It was then that Chad told Lori that they had felt this connection because they had actually been married multiple times in several of their past lives. While reincarnation isn't a part of mainstream Mormonism, it had been a part in early Mormonism, one part that isn't often talked about. It's likely that Chad liked the mystique that came with this more esoteric belief and latched onto it. All of this talk about their past lives only drew the two together even that much more. Shortly after they first met, Lori's husband, Charles Vallow, was ready to go on a business trip. At the same time, Chad was going to be in Arizona for another business venture. This left Lori with the freedom to hold a small religious gathering at her house. She invited Melanie Gibb and Chad over. Here, Chad was able to wow and mesmerize the women with this talk of his odd, vaguely inspired Mormon beliefs, convincing the two that he really did have some sort of higher knowledge. Those present said that Chad and Lori's meeting at the house had been a pretty evident hookup, in their words. It wasn't too long after that Chad and Lori officially became lovers, something that they barely even tried to hide. They justified it to themselves by saying that, technically, they were already married. Multiple times, in fact. Preparing a People began hosting regular podcasts, and Chad was often featured in them. On December 5th, 2018, things would be a little different, as this time he would guest star alongside Lori in an episode called Time to Warrior Up. While the episode has been lost, based on the title it seems that the theme would have tied to their beliefs in the end times, as much of their work did. After that, the two would come to appear in several more episodes together. Their friend, Melanie Gibb, would even come to guest star alongside Lori in several episodes. One of their episodes together has partially resurfaced. The description of this episode is, Melanie Gibb and Lori Vallow team up, sharing how some of the most extreme types of challenges help them find miracles in the reality of our best friend and lover of our souls, Jesus Christ.
You don't have joy. You haven't repented, Melanie. Because you're not having this joy. That was a huge clue for me.
Right, because
I couldn't figure it out.
But you were literally miserable.
I was.
So what is the opposite of joy?
Lori's own family began to see that Lori was changing, and not for the better. Her former sister-in-law, Annie Cushing, said, there was a tectonic shift in her, and she went over the edge. Even seeing what they could see, Lori and Chad's families didn't really realize how bad things were becoming behind the scenes. A bona fide cult was forming around Chad Daybell and his Doomsday beliefs. Chad and Lori began to call their little group the Church of the Firstborn. The group mainly consisted of Chad as the leader, Lori as his second-in-command, basically co-leader, Lori's niece, Melanie Boudreaux, her friend Melanie Gibb, her brother, Alex Cox, Zulema Pastenes, and a few others. Alex Cox would act as the group's little enforcer, and eventually he went on to get into a relationship with Zulema. As the group got more tight-knit, they got more bold. Rather than hiding their views that often conflicted with Mormon fundamentalism, Lori and Melanie Gibb even started hosting a radical religious podcast together. Chad got more and more into his views involving reincarnation. He said that he lived 31 lives in the past, sometimes on different planets. He said that Lori had lived 21, 10 less lives than him, and mostly on Earth. He said that when things did line up and they were on Earth at the same time, that was when the two would marry. Chad said that he was a reincarnation of James the Less, one of Jesus' disciples, and that Lori had been both the great-grandmother of Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet, and the wife of Moroni, another Mormon prophet in the past. He said that they had been through what are called multiple life probations, which some Mormons who believe in reincarnation believe are necessary to achieve spiritual purity. Chad and Lori continued to use this concept of past marriages to justify to their little cult about why they could be in a relationship together. Melanie Gibb suggested that they simply just leave their current spouses for each other, but Lori said that they weren't allowed to. She said that this was due to some mysterious order received from the other side of the void, the term that Chad would often use when speaking of his supposedly supernatural writing ability. In addition to their beliefs about reincarnation, Chad and Lori developed their own system for grading other people as well. They would put people on a scale of light to dark, signifying whether they were more close to God or to Satan. They said that people who were fully on the dark side of the spectrum were possessed by evil spirits. However, they were still savable. 7 women in the group, calling themselves the 7 Gatherers, would engage in group prayer or occult rituals over Zoom in order to purify people that they had labeled as dark. However, there was one step beyond being possessed, and that was what they called being a zombie. Zombies, they said, were beyond all hope. For a zombie, all you could do to free them from their possession would be to kill them. Chad and Lori also graded people on their vibrations, with this being less about good and evil and more about how close to prophethood they were. Those with higher vibrations would have more spiritual powers. Some, they said, could even create portals which allowed them to communicate over far distances or even travel to other worlds. Chad, continuing to say that he was guided from beyond the void, began to tell the cult that the world was going to end on July 22, 2020. Lori, now believing that she was a goddess in her own right with her powers, said that she and Chad would guide the 144,000 people who were set to survive when the world ended, with the 144,000 being a core belief in both Mormonism and the Jehovah's Witnesses faiths. In this, Lori decided that her actions were above mere earthly activities, proudly proclaiming to the cult that she wouldn't be held responsible for anything that she did on Earth. Their beliefs, although still rooted in Mormon fundamentalism, had been exaggerated to the extreme and elaborated on quite a bit at this point. By now, it would be hard to say that the cult was anything more than inspired by Mormon beliefs, but the cult members still felt that they were devout and dedicated Mormons. They felt that they were simply of a higher grade than the average follower and had a little more know-how. Lori's hatred of the men in her life now turned towards her current husband, Charles Vallow. In January of 2019, she began to project by accusing Charles of infidelity. In February, she told Charles that she no longer cared about him or JJ. Lori told him that he was possessed by an evil spirit named Ned Schneider, and that now she was the chosen one, assigned to carry out the work of the 144,000 during the Second Coming. She told him that the world was ending in July of 2020 and that she would kill him if he got in the way of her work. During this time, Chad was found to have flown to Arizona to see her. Charles started getting threats against his life during this time, as well as having his truck stolen and Lori taking about $35,000 from their joint bank account. Charles tried to get an order of protection against Lori, but he withdrew it about a month later, hoping that he could still make the marriage work despite the death threats. Still, he was shook enough to change his life insurance policy so that it would go to his sister rather than Lori if he died. Lori had no idea that he had done this. Charles begged Lori to get mental health care at a facility called Community Bridges. Surprisingly, she agreed to do so. However, even more surprisingly, she was found to be in a completely sound state of mind and was soon cleared medically by the staff. Lori began to text Alex very much of the same comments that she had told to Charles, referring to Charles now as either Ned or Hiplos, the name of another spirit she said was possessing him. Chad also began making some Google searches, such as Ned Schneider, Louisiana Obituary 1997. It wasn't too long before Lori said that Charles had passed the point of no return. He was now a zombie, meaning that, according to the cult's beliefs, he was beyond all help. All that could save him now was death. While Charles appeared to be completely normal to those around him, the cult took this as gospel and began to pray for his death. Then, Lori disappeared for about 58 days without contacting Charles at all. So, Charles moved himself and the kids back to Texas to be closer to JJ's grandparents, the Woodcocks. Lori was found to have been back in Hawaii during this time, and it was shown that she had met up with Chad multiple times during these 58 days. Eventually, Lori came back, moving out to Texas with Charles. Then the two moved back to Arizona together a short while afterwards. However, Charles discovered her affair with Chad. He confronted her with the affair, saying that he was going to tell Chad's wife Tammy what was going on as well. He sent an email to Tammy saying that their spouses were cheating together. Tammy opened the email, read it, deleted it, and blocked him. So Charles said that he was going to tell Tammy in person. Lori wouldn't be having this. She decided it was time for him to go. Charles was becoming more concerned with JJ and his safety, given that he had special needs and needed a lot of routine care, and Lori was anything but present these days. He was worried about Tylee as well, but given that he wasn't her biological father and never adopted her, there was very little he could do legally to help her. Charles came to pick up JJ from Lori's home one day on July 11th, 2019. He was surprised to see Lori's brother and co-cult member, Alex Cox, waiting there. Alex confronted Charles with all of Lori's accusations before ultimately getting into a scuffle. Alex pulled out a gun and shot Charles then and there. Before the actual gunshot, Lori's daughter Tylee took JJ and ran from the home to safety. Eventually, the police came out to review the scene. Alex and Lori claimed that Charles was enraged due to their coming divorce and came to the home with violence on his mind. They said that Alex had shot him purely in self-defense. Given that Tylee and JJ hadn't seen the actual murder, the police were left with nothing but Lori and Alex's word to go by. In the end, no charges were pressed. The police just left. They did note that Lori seemed emotionless the whole time, completely unconcerned that her husband had just died. While Alex was taken in for questioning, later that day the neighbors heard Lori throwing a pool party at the house with loud, booming music. Alex told Zulema that he didn't feel bad at all as he had only killed a zombie. A few days after Charles died, Chad sent Lori a love story that he had written about her in the form of a long series of text messages. He wrote of the story of their past lives, calling themselves James and Elena, and went into great detail about all the sex they had together. Mere days after Charles was cremated, Chad once again flew out to Arizona to see Lori. Afterwards, only more emboldened, Alex took out a $21,000 loan for what he said was medical reasons. However, there isn't any record of him getting any sort of medical help around this time. What we do know, though, is that he went out and bought a whopping 46 different guns with the money. Just a month after Charles died, Lori, Alex, and Lori's niece Melanie decided that it was time to move to Rexburg, Idaho with Lori's kids. On her rental application, Lori stated that they were moving there so that Tylee could attend BYU, Idaho. In reality, she never enrolled, and the move was in order to be closer to Chad. Worryingly, Lori sold JJ's service dog and a bunch of their belongings before heading out. Neighbors immediately noticed Lori's odd mistreatment of JJ, saying that he was often left outside unattended for very long periods of time with no supervision. When the neighbors confronted Lori about it, she told them that JJ was only her niece's drug baby, confusing them even further. Lori and Chad became more and more convinced, or simply found it convenient to believe, that Lori's kids, Tylee and JJ, were possessed. Much like with Charles, it wasn't too long before they claimed that the two kids had become zombies to the rest of the cult. Chad told his followers that JJ specifically wouldn't live much longer and that he was going to be reincarnated as Lori's son, Colby's next child. Lori, Chad, and Alex began to text back and forth about the kids' supposed possessions and what they called their perfectly orchestrated plan to take the children. They started referring to the kids not by their names, but by Z's instead, signifying that they fully believed that they were zombies and no longer even human at this point. Tylee hadn't actually enrolled into a new high school in Idaho yet, making it so that virtually nobody in the area, aside from her own family, actually even knew of her existence. The last time she was seen was in September of 2019 during a trip to Yellowstone National Park with Lori, Alex, and JJ. In the photos, both the kids, Lori, and Alex look very happy together. Little did the kids know what their mom and uncle were really planning for them. One day after their trip to Yellowstone, Alex made his way out to Lori's home in the middle of the night. While it isn't known for sure what happened, Tylee would never be seen again. The group, most likely mainly Alex, had murdered her. The next morning, Alex drove out to Chad's property as well. An attempt to dismember Tylee was made using a pickaxe, but it didn't work. They only managed to cut off her hands. Instead, her body was burned beyond recognition, leaving us with very little evidence as to what truly happened to her. She was then unceremoniously buried on Chad's property in a shallow grave. JJ would continue to live life as normal for a couple of weeks, or at least what was considered normal to him by this point. He was still left outside unattended for long stretches of time. On September 17, 2019, a doorbell camera captured footage of him playing outside, the last video or photo evidence that could prove his existence. It was said that he attended his school, Rexburg's Kennedy Elementary School, on September 20th, a few days later, for the last time. On September 22nd, JJ would be seen for the last time by the members of the cult. Melanie Gibb and her boyfriend, David Warwick, came over to Lori's home to stay the night. Lori and Melanie were all set to record a podcast together when they saw Alex carrying a sleeping JJ upstairs to his bedroom. The next morning, when Melanie and David woke up, they were surprised to see that JJ was nowhere to be found. Lori told them that he had been misbehaving, so Alex had come to pick him up and take him somewhere. In reality, Alex had suffocated JJ to death with a sheet of plastic and duct tape over his mouth. That morning, he had indeed taken JJ, but it wasn't due to the reason that Lori had given. He had once again taken him out to Chad's property to be buried. Lori appears to have joined them as well. That day, Chad, being as nonchalant as possible, decided to text his wife Tammy and come up with an excuse as to why he was digging a hole in the yard in case any questions were asked. He told Tammy that he had shot a large raccoon in the yard, one that was awake in broad daylight apparently, and that he was burying it in an area of the yard that they called their pet cemetery. While Tylee had been badly mutilated and treated with very little respect upon being buried, simply thrown into a hole with dirt piled on top of her, JJ was treated with much more care for reasons unknown. He was wrapped in plastic and buried under both rocks and wooden planks. Whether this is due to the group being more fond of him or not is unknown, but it could have easily just been because they simply weren't satisfied with how badly of a job they had done with the previous burial and realized that they needed to hide their tracks better. However, what they didn't hide was Alex's fingerprints and Lori's hair, both of which remained on the plastic. That day, JJ was absent from school with no reason given to his teachers. The next day, Lori called the school and told them that she would be homeschooling JJ from then on out. Lori kept collecting Social Security benefits related to the deaths of both of her kids' fathers. About a month after the murders, she felt that she needed to establish some sort of evidence that the kids were still alive. She hopped onto Tylee's Venmo account and sent 2 payments to Tylee's older brother, Colby. Colby reached out to Tylee over text, worried about her. He received responses that said that she was fine, but too busy to talk. He tried calling her multiple times, but he could never get through, worrying him even more. Colby, hoping to see his siblings again, wrote a message to them on Facebook in September, hoping that they would see it somehow and reach out. He wrote, "I pray for you both every day. I always have to ask, how is this possible? You both mean so much to me. My heart is broken over all of this. I'm going to speak with our mom. I need to know what is happening with you both. Just know I love you with all my heart. I'm here to stand up for you. I won't leave no matter how hard this gets. I love you, Tylee and JJ." For weeks and weeks, nothing about the kids' location would be revealed to anyone. Instead, everyone was hit with conflicting statements as to where they were and why they were there. Over this time, fear and concern for their safety only grew. Lori's niece, Melanie Boudreaux, had gotten very deeply involved with their cult at this point. She had been insisting that she and her husband, Brandon, stock up on food for the end of the world, worrying him that she was going down quite the radical rabbit hole. This worry was confirmed when, around the time that Tylee and JJ disappeared, she suddenly expressed to Brandon that she wanted a divorce. Brandon said that he was blindsided by the request, blaming it all on Melanie being a part of her aunt's crazy cult. That October, Brandon was driving home one day when a Jeep sped past him and shot towards him. The bullets missed his head by mere inches as the Jeep sped off. Brandon, who had been around the various cult members a lot by this point, recognized the Jeep as one that Tylee had been driving before. He was able to get the license plate number and turned it over to the police. The police were able to find that the car was indeed registered to Charles Vallow. Hearing this, Brandon connected all of the dots. Charles' supposed self-defense death, the kids being missing, and now the attempt on his life. This was all a result of Lori's cult, and now that murderous cult had showed up right to his own front door. He knew that, now that Melanie felt slighted by him, he was probably next. Later on, he filed a document with the court stating that the attempt on his life was probably made by Alex Cox, the cult enforcer, and that it was most likely done in a bid to get his life insurance. He even said that Melanie was very likely fully aware of what really happened to Tylee and JJ. The police did take this seriously, tracking Alex Cox's cell phone data. They found that Alex had searched Google for directions out to Brandon's home and that he had been in the area near his home in the hours leading up to the shooting. He had also been in contact with Lori multiple times throughout the day, with Lori herself even Googling the shooting shortly after it took place, looking for any local articles about it, likely trying to confirm if Brandon had survived. After the shooting, Chad Daybell gave Alex Cox what is called a patriarchal blessing, something that he wasn't qualified to give in the LDS Church. He said that this was because Alex had assisted he and Lori in ways that they could never repay. Chad even called Alex both a prophet and a hero, saying that he would have a bright future ahead of him as a messenger of the Lord. The full recording of this blessing has actually been leaked.
We're going to give Alex Lamar Cox a patriarchal blessing. Alexander Lamar Cox, on this special day, I lay my hands upon your head to give you a patriarchal blessing as part of the member of the Church of the Firstborn that you have earned the privilege to be a member of. I do so by the power of the Melchizedek priesthood which I hold, and in the name of Jesus Christ, our Savior, who has authorized this blessing. Previous creations on which you've lived, I see you on the third creation as a valiant warrior, fighting for truth and righteousness, always seeking to do what is right. And you progressed in that creation. Powerful goddesses were needed to be protected, and you were selected to help protect your sister, and you helped her in numerous probations as a defender.
Up until this point, nearly all of the murders and attempted murders that had been carried out were done against Lori's family. That, however, was about to change. Chad had grown tired of being married to Tammy, given that all of his focus was on Lori at this point. In fact, Lori was already looking at wedding rings online, fully convinced that Tammy wouldn't be around to bother her much longer. Chad told Lori that Tammy was possessed by a spirit named Viola, much like how Charles had supposedly been possessed by Ned. Much like the others, Chad deemed Tammy to be a zombie. This effectively put a target on her back to the entire cult. However, this time, unlike the other cases, he wouldn't leave this information for the cult's ears only. While speaking to his neighbors, Todd and Alice Gilbert, he said that he had a vision that Tammy would die before her 50th birthday. On October 9th, Alex Cox once again set out on a mission, this time staking out Chad and Tammy's house. Alex made multiple incriminating Google searches, trying to find out what kind of damage a Grendel round from an AR-15 would do to a Dodge Dakota, the car that Tammy owned. Given that he failed shooting Brandon while he was driving only a week prior, he didn't want to make the same mistake again. Alex took his AR-15 out to the Daybell home. Wearing a mask, he pulled up near Tammy as she was standing outside and shot towards her multiple times. Either he missed with every single shot, or the gun had misfired. Either way, no damage was actually done. Because of that, Tammy felt this was only a prank and that the shooter was likely using a paintball gun. Still, she reported it to the police. The night that Tammy was attacked in the driveway, Zulema Pastenes had been with Lori and Melanie to do their usual prayers for the possessed. In the middle of that, Lori quickly answered her phone. After talking for a moment, she seemed very angry. She called the other person on the line an idiot, a moron, and stupid before abruptly hanging up. She told the group, "Idiot can't do anything by himself," before resuming their prayer session. 10 days later, Alex once again made his way out to Tammy's home, this time to finish the job. He asphyxiated Tammy to death in her own home. Later on, Tammy was supposedly found dead in her home by Chad. It was believed that she had died from natural causes. Chad claimed that she had been suffering from a terrible cough the night before and that she must have died in her sleep. He said that she had been experiencing low blood pressure, seizures, and negative reactions to medication leading up to that point, but there aren't any medical records that support those claims. 3 days later, Tammy's funeral was held in Utah. Alice Gilbert, their neighbor, said that she was surprised at how quickly the funeral was put together, almost as if it were pre-planned. It was also noticed that Chad, unlike he and Tammy's kids, didn't seem to be impacted by the death at all. He didn't seem genuinely upset to them, more like he was trying to fake cry and force tears out, but failing in that effort. During that very funeral, Chad spoke about Tammy, saying that she was suffering from depression and was very lazy, making her a hard person to live with. Meanwhile, Lori was at home Googling wedding dresses that same day. Chad ended up cashing out a few life insurance policies tied to Tammy, getting him a bit over $430,000. Initially, Chad refused to let Tammy have any sort of autopsy at all, and given that everything seemed to be due to natural causes, the coroner simply accepted his decision. One day after Tammy's funeral, Chad was introducing Lori to his kids. Only a week after that, he told his neighbors, Todd and Alice, that he met the woman he was going to marry. A couple of days later, he took Lori over to meet them. Alice described the whole thing as being very awkward, saying that Chad was laughing, happy, and much more affectionate with Lori than he had ever been with Tammy, all while the funeral had been less than 2 weeks prior. For the first time, he let on as to what happened with Tylee, telling the neighbors that Lori had also lost someone recently, a daughter. With his new marriage being heavily scrutinized, Chad decided to talk to Tammy's family. He went to her sister, Samantha Gwilliam, and told her not to worry. He said that Tammy's ghost had appeared to him at the cemetery and told him to move on. He also told Samantha that he and Lori would be empty nesters as Lori had no kids. At this point, Tylee and JJ weren't known to be dead, and they still weren't even considered to be officially missing. By November, Chad and Lori were on a plane and heading out to Hawaii to get married. With their big life insurance payouts, they were ready to go live large. Apart from his kids, Chad didn't even tell anyone he was leaving. The two got married in a lavish Hawaiian style, with Chad's own mother not even knowing of the marriage until long after they were actually married. Late November, on the 26th, the Woodcocks, who had previously taken care of him, were fed up with being denied access to the boy. They called the police to perform a welfare check on Lori's Idaho home. Chad and Alex were there when the police arrived, acting very suspicious to them. Alex, not knowing that JJ's grandmother had been the one to call for the welfare check, told the police that JJ was with his grandmother. As if this wasn't enough of a big red flag, Chad told the police that he was Alex's friend and that he barely knew Lori. The police then contacted Lori, who said that JJ was staying with Melanie Gibb in Arizona. So then the police contacted Melanie. She told them that she hadn't seen JJ in months. Lori and Alex now knew that the police were hot on their trail. That night, their neighbors saw them quickly packing a truck outside of the home. The next day, the police and FBI came back out to the home to search it, only to find that it was completely abandoned. Chad and Lori had hopped on the earliest flight that they could and headed back out to Hawaii. This time, they felt that they would simply just stay there and evade justice. It seemed that they forgot that Hawaii was still a part of the United States. Either way, they used their big bucks and moved into a gated community on the island of Kauai. On their application forms for their home, they listed that they both didn't have any children. The police in Idaho requested a warrant for locating the Jeep that had been used by the gunman who fired at Brandon Boudreaux a few months back in Arizona. Melanie Gibb herself then turned on Chad and Lori. She called the police to tell them that both Chad and Lori had contacted her separately, both telling her to tell the police that JJ was with her. While looking for JJ, the police came to find that Lori's daughter, Tylee, was missing as well. The police got a lot more serious with their investigation from then on out, trying to find out where Chad and Lori had gone and where the kids were. They also decided that they really needed to find out what actually happened to Tammy and ordered for her body to be exhumed. Her body was then taken in for an autopsy where it was found that she had been asphyxiated. Her death was now labeled as a homicide. Zulema came home to find Alex on the phone with Lori and Chad, being told that Tammy's body was being exhumed. Zulema was confused as to why they would even need to. She began to grill Alex, asking him why this was even necessary if she had died of natural causes. She asked Alex if he had anything to do with her death, but he said that he didn't. However, after a little while, Alex became very quiet. It seemed that he finally realized that he was being used. He opened up to Zulema, telling her, "I think I am being their fall guy." She asked what he would even be the fall guy for, but he refused to answer. The next day, Alex died in the home that he and Zulema shared. His death was confirmed to be due to both high blood pressure and blood clots. In December, the police announced that Tylee and JJ were both officially considered to be missing. They asked for public assistance in tracking them down. They said that the missing case was connected to Tammy Daybell's death and that Lori and Chad were persons of interest. This sent the media into a frenzy, especially since both of the persons of interest were prominent characters within the Mormon Doomsday prepper scene. The Woodcocks, JJ's grandparents, used this media presence to beg the public for help in finding the kids. Chad's own brother, Matt, begged for Chad and Lori to return to the children. The Woodcocks then posted a $20,000 reward for information leading up to the children's return. Finally, Chad and Lori were located in Hawaii in January. The police showed up to serve them with a court order, one that would require them to physically produce Tylee and JJ to either the Department of Welfare or the police in Idaho within only 5 days. The police then seized their rental car and searched their new home in their gated community. Concerningly, while doing so, they found both Tylee's debit card and JJ's iPad with no sign of the kids ever having been there. Chad and Lori were soon confronted by reporters demanding to know where the kids were, but they refused to answer anything.
Are the kids okay? Can you tell me?
I just can't comment.
Is there anything that you would like to say to people at all who are, number one, concerned about the kids or concerned about you and your wife? Anything at all you want to say to them?
Just grateful for any support. We just have to wait for the legal process to work through.
And can you tell me, Mr. Daybell, are the kids okay?
A few weeks later, the police found a storage locker in Rexburg that Lori had been renting but had since abandoned. There they found a good collection of items that had belonged to Tylee and JJ, everything ranging from photos to bicycles to clothing. They appeared to have been quickly thrown into storage before Lori and Chad had abruptly left for Hawaii. When they reviewed the security camera footage, they found Lori and Alex on camera quickly throwing the items into storage. On February 20th, 2020, Lori was formally arrested in Hawaii. A few weeks later in March, she was carted back to Idaho. There, she was facing 2 felony charges of desertion and non-support of dependent children, along with several other misdemeanors. She was hit with a massive bail of $5 million at first, but it was lowered to $1 million after her successful extradition. She tried to lower her bail even further, but failed as no local bond companies were willing to work with her. After Lori was arrested, Chad returned to Idaho defeated. He tried to convince the neighbors to put up their home for bond to get Lori out of prison, saying that Jesus had told them that this would be the way to go. The neighbors did not buy it. When Alice asked him what had happened to the children and confronted him with how he had told her Lori's daughter was dead, Chad said that it was simply a custody issue. He said that Tylee didn't like people and didn't like him either, speaking of her notably in past tense. Chad was soon out of luck as well. The police continued to search his property, eventually making their way out to the backyard. They were motivated to do so after seeing Alex Cox's location history from his phone. There they came across multiple unmarked shallow graves. This was in none other than Chad's supposed pet cemetery. Chad panicked and phoned Lori in jail to tell her about what was happening. After the police started to zone in on where the bodies were buried, Chad tried to distract them and drive them away from the scene. Then Chad tried to get into the car and flee the scene himself, but he was chased down and captured. He was arrested for both obstruction and concealment of evidence. he was thrown into jail too, with the same bail amount of $1 million. It was finally confirmed by the Woodcocks and Charles Ryan's families that human remains were found on Chad's property, and that they were the bodies of Tylee and JJ. The police soon confirmed that same information themselves as well. They also noted that Alex's fingerprints and Lori's hair were found in JJ's grave. Soon after, Chad Daybell, after a long Mormon career, was officially excommunicated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, citing that his odd religious teachings, branded as a Doomsday cult, were the reason. Lori's charges were soon changed. The 2 charges of desertion and non-supportive dependent children were dropped in favor of obstruction or concealment of evidence now that the bodies were found. Her bond was actually lowered to $150,000. However, Chad's bond didn't change. Time passed, roughly a year until May of 2021. Chad and Lori were finally indicted on charges of both conspiracy to commit first-degree murder for the deaths of the kids and grand theft related to the theft of their Social Security benefits that they should have been receiving from their fathers. Chad was also hit with a fraud case related to Tammy's life insurance. Then Lori was hit with yet another charge, that being 1 count of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder for the death of her husband, Charles Vallow. They decided that there wasn't enough evidence to link Chad to that specific murder. In September of 2021, Chad Daybell's kids surprised the world by coming out to the media, saying that their father was innocent and had basically been framed. They said that Lori Vallow had taken advantage of him and fooled him in, quote, the worst, most deadly way possible. They said that he had nothing to do with the deaths of Tylee and JJ, despite their bodies being found on his property. His daughter, Emma, said, "My father needs someone to be a voice for him, to let people know what's real, what we know." Then the trials for the couple would finally come around. While Lori was all set to go to trial first, things weren't moving so smoothly. Mainly due to her religious, cultish beliefs, she was found to be incompetent and unfit to stand trial, delaying things pretty substantially. However, in April of 2022, she was finally deemed to be competent to stand trial after receiving some mental health treatment. However, her attorneys continued to file motion after motion, hoping to undermine her competency even further. By November, she was once again found to be fully competent. Around that time, she was indicted on 1 count of first-degree premeditated murder in the attempted shooting of Brandon Boudreaux. The prosecutor said that she was likely hoping to gain access to his life insurance money as well through her niece, a loyal member of her cult. Lori and Chad predictably pled not guilty to all the charges against them. Eventually, their cases were split up entirely in March of 2023 at Chad's own request. This is because Chad had waived his right to a speedy trial, with his attorneys saying that they needed more time to review DNA evidence. Chad's attorneys also said that this was due to the defense being what they called mutually antagonistic. Since Lori didn't request the same delay, her trial was all set to go on as planned. The prosecutors had dozens and dozens of witnesses to use at their disposal. They had claimed to a lot of people, either directly or indirectly, that they planned to eliminate both of Lori's children in order to remove any obstacles in their relationship and to get their hands on some money. The prosecutor said that the two had justified the killings in their own minds by their system of lights, darks, and zombies, bringing their strange belief system to light to the courts. The death penalty was taken off of the table in Lori's trial, given that newly discovered DNA evidence had been discovered too close to the trial and wouldn't have been able to be admissible in court. Lori's trial officially began in April of 2023 in Boise, Idaho. She didn't testify, and her lawyers didn't call any witnesses to trial. The prosecutors, though, on the other hand, called about 60 different people to testify against her. Given that it was clear that Alex had been the direct murderer, the prosecutors made it very evident that Lori had manipulated her brother into doing her dirty work for her. Lori's own sister said that Alex had suffered some brain damage from a car accident in the past and that his decision-making level was that of a teenager at best. Zulema also testified that Alex was completely under Chad and Lori's thumbs, being told that he was a reincarnated warrior of God and that he was only brought to Earth to protect Lori. To counter these claims, Lori's attorney, Jim Archibald, said that Lori was the one under Chad's control all along. On May 12th of 2023, Lori was found guilty in all of the charges against her. She was soon sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for the murders of Tylee and JJ and the conspiracy to commit the murder of Tammy Daybell. She was also hit with multiple fines for grand theft charges. The judge said that Lori had chosen the most evil and destructive path possible, gone down a bizarre religious rabbit hole, and murdered the kids to keep them from obstructing her love life and to profit off of them. Lori spoke to the public, saying that she had been speaking to not only Jesus, but to Tammy, Tylee, and JJ. She said that they were happy and extremely busy in heaven. She said, "Jesus Christ knows that no one was murdered in this case. Accidental deaths happen, suicides happen, fatal side effects from medications happen."
Jesus knows me, and Jesus understands me. I mourn with all of you who mourn, my children and Tammy. I know for a fact that my children are happy and busy in the spirit world. Because of my communications with my friend Tammy Daybell, I know that she is also very happy and extremely busy. Tylee has visited me. She is happy and very busy. Tylee is free now from all the pains of her life. The first time JJ visited me after he passed away, he put his arm around me and he said to me, "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom. I love you, and I know you loved me every minute of my life." He is busy, he is engaged, he has jobs that he does there, and he is happy where he is. And I look forward to the day when we are all reunited, and I too will rest with them in the arms of my Jesus.
Meanwhile, Chad was in big trouble. By delaying his case, he was now very much eligible for the death penalty with the new evidence. His lawyers filed 3 different motions trying to have the death penalty taken off the table, saying that Lori had manipulated Chad through emotional and sexual control. They argued that he was much less to blame than Lori, who had gotten away with no death penalty herself. The motions were shot down. Chad's own trial started on April 10th of 2024. The prosecutor said that Chad was nothing but a man motivated by sex, money, and power. He said that he craved to be a person of significance in the world, seeing his own wife and Lori's kids as being in the way of his destiny. His attorney, though, John Pryor, said that he was a poor, pious man who was lured into an inappropriate relationship with Lori, who convinced him that he was her protector. Chad's defense once again began to scrounge for loopholes, stating that his indictment incorrectly listed JJ's death as having taken place on either September 8th or 9th when it was technically on the 22nd or 23rd. They tried to use this to have him acquitted of all charges. The judge ruled that this small clerical error wasn't grounds enough for acquittal. 2 of Chad's kids, Emma and Garth, came to testify in his name. They said that their mom was indeed having health problems and was getting tired extremely easily. However, Tammy's work colleague said that she was healthy and energetic up until the last day they saw her. Tammy's sister also testified that she had never mentioned any health problems and didn't appear to have any either. Chad himself never took to the stand to testify. The prosecution began to explain Chad's strange cult beliefs to the courts. Chad's attorney said that, yes, they did believe these things, but Lori and Alex were the true aggressors, saying that Lori was motivated by greed and manipulated Chad to do her bidding all along the way. He even said that Chad would have likely been her next victim. Regardless of what Chad's lawyers asserted, the jury found him guilty of both first-degree murder and conspiracy in the deaths of Tammy, Tylee, and JJ. He, like Lori, was also found guilty of grand theft, both in relation to Tylee and JJ's money and to Tammy's life insurance. Larry Woodcock was happy with the verdicts, saying, "What did they accomplish? Nothing. What did they do? They destroyed families." On June 1st, 2024, Chad was formally sentenced to death. In addition, he was sentenced to multiple 15-year sentences in prison to run back-to-back and was ordered to pay restitution of about $430,000. Tammy's family, Chad's siblings, the Boudreaux family, and Cox family issued statements saying that they were relieved that their trials were finally over and stated that their thoughts and prayers went out to the victims. They praised the diligent work of the police, the prosecutors, and the judges and jurors for ending this case for good. Things weren't entirely over for Lori, though. While she's definitely going to be in prison for the rest of her life, she was still extradited to Arizona to face her 2 conspiracy charges there. After more back and forth from her lawyers, the case trial date was set for February 24th, 2025. However, toward the end of 2024, Lori's attorneys once again called for another competency hearing. Surprisingly, after this, Lori waived her right to counsel and decided to represent herself at her trial. On December 5th, she was found to be mentally fit and competent once again. Lori said that she now had real trial experience after the last one and had been using her time in jail to study law. Eventually, the court decided to try her separately for both the Charles Vallow murder case and the attempted murder case of Brandon Boudreaux. The trial date for the Charles Vallow case was moved to March 31st, 2025. The next trial won't take place until after the first has concluded. The group that used to heavily feature Chad and Lori on their podcast have been in quite a big legal battle with the media ever since Chad and Lori's actions came to light. They pulled any of their podcast or other material featuring the two and have started sending cease and desist orders to any other websites hosting them, making a good majority of the podcast lost media. On their website, they wrote, "We formally are notifying all media and individuals to cease and desist from mentioning the Prepare a People event brand or our media company in any negative connection with Chad or Lori Daybell or their case. We care about their children and all the families affected by the ongoing circumstances of the legal investigation. We ask for this respect as well for our many other clients. Preparing a People events were always public, held in civic venues, and the podcasts were always free to the public." Dubbed the Vallow-Daybell Doomsday murders in the media, this case has gotten the Mormon Church a whole lot of flack over the last few years. Given that Investigation Discovery, the Lifetime Movie Network, and Netflix have all released specials about the case over the last few years, it's very likely that the case's reputation will only grow over time. Chad and Tammy's Idaho home, the house of horrors where the murders, or at least the burials, took place, was purchased by a nonprofit organization that wanted nothing more than to tear it down to the ground. They succeeded in doing just that, instead hoping that the land the home previously existed on will instead be used as a place of healing. Chad Daybell is still on death row at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution in Kuna, Idaho. Lori, on the other hand, is still on trial for conspiracy charges, but it has already been decided that she will serve multiple consecutive life sentences regardless of the outcome. It's likely that those cases will simply only result in even more life sentences for her to serve. To this day, it's unknown how deeply that Chad and Lori really did believe their little self-crafted religion. While it is highly likely that they did believe what they preached to an extent, given that they were religious for their entire lives and quite into the more obscure beliefs before they even started their cult, it's also likely that part of them knew what they were doing was for their own personal gain. After all, their rulings on other people always worked out in their own favor. Anytime that someone was deemed to have crossed the border from dark to zombie, it was either someone that was in their way to becoming a child-free married couple or someone that they could greatly profit from. In most cases, it was both. It's likely that we will never really know what they were truly thinking or how deeply they really believed what they were teaching. Since the trial, it really isn't known what has become of the other members of the cult. Only time will tell if they will denounce Chad and Lori's beliefs completely, or go down a much darker path and continue their insanity. They have condemned both Chad and Lori at their trials, but how genuine they were in doing that isn't really clear. Let's just hope the cult is done for good. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I also have a merch store now. There you can get yourself some cool Dire Trip t-shirts, mugs, posters, and really all sorts of other stuff too. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media. If anything were to ever happen to this channel, that would probably be the only way you'd ever hear about it. I also really appreciate when people follow me on Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are up too, and you can get the same benefits there as well. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.